I read two devotionals on a daily basis. One of them relates to scripture, and the other one will relate to history. And for a little while, I've been working through Robert Morgan's church history devotional titled On This Day, 365 Amazing and Inspiring Stories about Saints, Martyrs, and Heroes. Now, some of them are good in this book. And generally, I think it's an okay book. But there's also a lot of things in here that I don't accept Morgan's analysis. And in some cases, I'm deeply disturbed by it. And I want to look at one example here, which frankly, I think is less about Robert Morgan and this devotional, and it's more about some deeply entrenched and misogynistic attitudes in Christian history. So let's take a look. This was the other day, a few days ago, on John Wesley, and I talked about his three different failed, ill-fated romances. The first with Sophie Hopke. This was when Wesley was 33. He had a romantic interest in her. Now, as memory serves, Morgan doesn't note the age here, but I believe Hopke was in her late teens at this time. I think she was about 18 when Wesley was interested in her 15 years older, 15 years her senior. Maybe standards admittedly were somewhat different in the 18th century than today, but still, I think for myself, that's a little concerning. Then we have his ill-fated relationship with Grace Murray, and then finally with Mary, who was also known as Molly, and that was the lady that he ended up marrying, who was his nurse for just a short while. Now, their marriage was, as Morgan rightly notes, quote, a disaster. And he notes, and this is fair, he notes that Mary had been observed to be physically abusive toward Wesley. So he says, once I went into a room and found Mrs. Wesley, this is quoting John Hampson, found Mrs. Wesley foaming with fury. Her husband was on the floor where she had been trailing him by the hair of his head, and she was still holding in her hand venerable locks which she had plucked by the roots. Okay, that is spousal abuse. I don't mean to diminish that. My problem is in the one-sided analysis that comes through in the devotional. So this is how it ends on this second page. Morgan writes, the two spent little time together, and in 1771, we find this curious entry in Wesley's journal. Quote, I came to London and was informed that my wife died on Monday. This evening she was buried, though I was not informed of it. And then this is the life verse, the inspiring verse that Morgan gives us for this day of reflection. He says, a nagging wife goes on and on like the drip, drip, drip of the rain. You may inherit all your own from your parents, but a sensible wife is a gift from the Lord. Proverbs 19. The reflection here, the implication clearly is that the ill-fated relationship of Wesley and Mary was all Mary's fault, that she was, quote unquote, a nag. This is, frankly, I think, deeply misogynistic as commentary and deeply unfair to Mary. And that's what I just want to take a moment to unpack for the remainder of this video. So what I want to do is take a brief look at a letter that Wesley wrote to another young woman. Now, first, a little bit of background. One of the two factors I would submit for why Wesley's marriage to Mary was ill-fated and why that wasn't all her fault is that from the very beginning, and you can't fault Wesley for being consistent, but from the very beginning, he was insistent to her that he was changing nothing, and that marriage would change nothing, that he would continue to remain an itinerant traveling evangelist who would be gone for weeks and often months at a time. Either expecting his wife to be fully supportive with him on the road or to be a quiet, quiescent wife in the background, waiting for him to return after months. And already that sets up a rather unreasonable standard. It doesn't sound like Wesley ever really should have been married, right? But there's a deeper problem with this as well. And it's the one I want to go to now, which is Wesley's relationships with other women. Now, I don't know if Wesley had affairs, as we would call them, and I don't know if his behaviors toward young women could be viewed as predatory. But I do think there's evidence that some of his behaviors, some of his communications with other women do sound to the ear today to be predatory in nature. And I want to give you an example. So he's writing here to a young woman named Sarah Ryan. This is available at the Wesley Works digital edition online from January 20th, 1758. He's been married for a few years now. And let's just go to this second full paragraph here. Wesley writes to Sarah, most of the trials you have lately met with have been of another kind, but it is expedient for you to go through both evil and good report. The conversing with you, either by speaking or writing, is an unspeakable blessing to me. I cannot think of you without thinking of God. Others often lead me to him, but it is, as it were, going roundabout. You bring me straight into his presence. Now, if I saw this kind of language that a pastor was writing to a congregant, not his wife, I would immediately red flag that as deeply problematic. And I think, frankly, it looks like grooming behavior. Like this pastor or this church leader is trying to single out this individual, this woman, and give her some special sense of her own importance in his life, her unique importance, not reflected by anybody else, including his very own wife. This is setting up a deeply problematic notion of intimacy, of relationship with Sarah Ryan. And I think it is 100% understandable why Mary would have been deeply distressed, as she was, by Wesley writing to young women like this, speaking in this manner, while he is gone for weeks and months at a time. Molly was desperate and would often open up Wesley's mail and read the things that these women were writing to him. And can you understand, as a wife, how distressing that would be? If another person walked in on Wesley and Molly fighting and saw her pulling him by the hair, yes, it's abusive, it's inappropriate, it's wrong. But what are the catalysts for that? And this is the kind of basic questions and questioning who Wesley was as a person, which is not even considered in this devotional from Morgan, where the one lesson he wants to draw from Proverbs 19 is that a woman who is not a quiescent spouse who will support you and do whatever you as a man want and desire, and whatever you think is God's calling upon your life. She doesn't fall in a line. She is like the drip, drip, drip of a leaky faucet. This seems to me to be a profoundly problematic, and I would submit, misogynistic understanding. And it's not hard to see that this isn't simply about church history, right? This is how we today continue to view the role of men and women, and the way that we can validate men who are treating their spouses poorly, how we can gaslight those spouses by suggesting to them that it's all your fault, how we can look the other way and validate or rationalize or justify men who are potentially engaging in predatory behavior toward female congregants. So I will give Morgan's devotional credit, because it did get me thinking a lot about issues that are of great import, although I submit it is probably not for the reasons that he ever envisioned.